Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to talk about the quote-unquote soft landing of China's residential real estate market. And when I say residential real estate, in fact, I think this also applies to commercial real estate. And in particular, when I talk about residential real estate, actually, I'm referring to those high-rise real estates. In developing this podcast, I want to first talk about very briefly the 6 characteristics that make living in such type of real estate development a miserable experience. I made a separate recording of this in Chinese about a month back, but I'm just going to cover them very briefly without expanding on each point because I think they are somewhat self-evident. And after I do that, I want to move on to talk about what soft landing is envisioned in China by those in power, those who are managing this market. And finally, I want to make the argument that such soft landing is impossible. And I want to explain why. So first, the 6.6 characteristics that make living in such real estates a miserable experience. In fact, I said living in such environment, but also in conducting business in such commercial real estate, also shares the same problems. First, in terms of comfort, in terms of psychological wellness, it's really bad because it's just a lot of people packed in a same building like a sardine, right? Like a sardine can. That's really bad. Maintenance problems, right? Because when you have high rises, there are a lot of complexity in maintenance. And when your utilities, when the building gets old, it gets very costly and in certain cases impossible to maintain the utilities if the building has not been carefully designed, engineered, and constructed from the beginning. And of course, it is virtually impossible to extend the utilities to add something that has not been there from the beginning. For example, natural gas. If the building has not been provisioned with natural gas from the beginning, it gets much harder to actually connect each apartment or each unit to access natural gas. Third, there's a problem with traffic. Simply because a lot of people are packed in the same building. Downstairs on the street level, there's going to be a lot of traffic problems. The environmental impact, right, of constructing such buildings, but also at the same time, the environment that is left when between these among these buildings, right? Because you have concrete jungles, perhaps dotted with a few trees here and there, but those trees are not going to grow very well, and they don't actually provide a natural environment that is appealing, that is psychologically rewarding to live in. Fifth, aesthetically, these buildings are mostly miserable. They are ugly, and in fact, in China, they are built pretty much alike. I did an 8,000-kilometer road trip last month. The entire May, I took on a trip across China, and one thing that you can't ignore. Two things that you can't ignore. One is that very good highway connection everywhere. That is, I think, mostly empty, and I think that's probably an overinvestment. But that's fine. It provides good experience nevertheless. But the other is the real estate situation. There's empty buildings that are built alike and poorly constructed all around. And a lot of these buildings constructed perhaps under 5 years ago simply have cracks on the exterior, and you can imagine, and before those buildings have been fully occupied, and as a side note, they will never be fully occupied simply because there aren't so many people, despite China being one of the largest countries in terms of population. It is not possible to occupy these so many buildings. There is a number that's being quoted, which is 600 million units. 600 million, not units, 600 million residential buildings. The number of units are certainly above 1 billion, perhaps about 2 billions. That actually makes it impossible for all the units to be fully occupied. But before that, the buildings are already deteriorating, and we can expect those buildings not to be kept up simply because people will not be paying for their maintenance, and simply because those were tools that are employed simply to make money on the short term. Nevertheless, the sixth point is energy consumption. Those buildings cost a lot of energy to operate: electricity, to heat, and the power loss, water leaks, all these things all contribute to a very wasteful way of developing cities. Why were they developed like this? They were developed like this because this is the quickest way to make money. And of course, when people do this, they don't think about the long term. And in fact, the long term has, in a lot of cases, been to make money very quickly doing these type of constructions in China, then take the money and go to Vancouver, go to Toronto, go to Sydney, go to Melbourne, go to Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, these type of places, and then buy a house, and perhaps a big one, employ a lot of security to make sure that people who have some problems with their business practices or perhaps political practices are kept away. But anyway, that's the plan. So people did have a plan for themselves, but they don't always have a plan for the community. And that is a big problem. So the situation, let's not talk about the price. The price is not important. I don't like to talk about the price, because if there is a way to support the price, then it's just fine, right? Why not? It can be each shitty apartment can be $50 or $100 million. That's not a problem, right? But the problem is that it is not sustainable, and as the price becomes unsustainable, we have a problem. And this leads us to the second point, which is the soft landing proposition. The Chinese government very clearly intends to organize, to manage a soft landing for the real estate market. And what they hope is to stabilize the price, perhaps with marginal drops in areas when there is really, really low demand and an exodus of the local population, but somewhat stable and perhaps rising prices in some of the flagship cities, or the ones that you have heard of. Yeah, that's what they hope, and they hope that in 10, 20 years time, when people's income has greatly increased, and when China becomes a more technologically advanced economy, when it overtakes America, that's what they hope, in terms of the total size of the economy, but also in terms of innovation. Then the current pricing will not be so outlandish when compared to an income level that is perhaps 5 to 10 times higher than it is now. So that will be a soft landing. This is, of course, a very beautiful way of thinking, and I also have ways of thinking that perhaps one day I will win some big lottery, and so I will purchase a big majestic villa in Italy, in middle of Italy, perhaps close to Florence, and I will buy some. Maybe buy another real estate, but buy another big house in Utah or Colorado, perhaps. Buy a big house there for the summer. I also think perhaps I will have the Ferrari 812 GTS. As a special car, and perhaps a daily driver would be, Lexus LC500, perhaps that, and also a G63 AMG for off-road and camping, etc. But those are beautiful thoughts that could happen, but that's unlikely, right? So now let's talk about how the soft landing is unlikely. It's virtually impossible. And this is for a very simple reason. That is because when you have a bubble that has grown to the current dimensions, this scale, what's the status is that you have to keep on running faster and faster in order to keep still, right? So you have to continue to increase the price just so that that everything can still go on, that the lenders, that the banks will still be able to keep a good balance sheet, that the borrowers, mostly the real estate developers, but also a lot of the people who have purchased things for the purchase of these houses themselves, who borrowed money, they will be able to roll over their debt, perhaps, right? That's and also for because the housing price is extremely high in China, it is not possible for buyers of real estate to buy and rent and use the rents to cover the mortgage payments. In fact, it is far less. The rents are far lower than the mortgage payments, so that is not a viable option. And of course, there are a lot more in supply than in demand, meaning that even if you want to rent out your apartment, which has not been let out, which is not being let out at the moment, you won't be able to do so. And in fact, when more people try, the rent will actually drop further, making it even less profitable a proposition. For the real estate companies, we already see that a lot of the companies have problems with liquidity, but in the short term, this is a liquidity problem. In the long term, as the price stabilizes downward, we will see that it is more than a liquidity problem, but also a balance sheet problem, meaning that the assets needs to be written down, and so there's a lot of debt that can't actually be covered. So there's that problem. right? And then there is also the capacity problems when you have built up the industrial capacity for a certain level of real estate development. In fact, a real estate development that has been accelerating right up to 2020. I'm not going to say what happened in 2020, but right up to 2020 has been an accelerating industry with a lot of upwards and upstream and downstream industries. The entire ecosystem employs hundreds of millions of people and provides, I don't know exactly what percentage. There is a saying that is around a quarter of China's economy, but some people say, I've heard people say that up to 60%. I guess that really depends on just how much further upstream and downstream you want to link these industries. And of course, when people quote the number of 60%, that is not to say that in certain industries that are upstream and downstream, every output or input has been to or from real estate, right? So for example, steel is an upstream industry of real estate, but that does not mean that 100% of the output of the steel industry is going to real estate. So that provides a lot of room for exactly how you account for these. But a lot of the industry, I think it's fair to say that a large part of the Chinese industrial output has been linked in one way or another, directly, occasionally, but more frequently, indirectly, to real estate. And as real estate prices stabilize and real estate construction slows down, these industries are impacted. And what happens then is that there will be slower lending in those industries. There will be a contraction in those industries. There will be layoffs in those industries. And the overall effect is a deflationary effect that puts a pressure on pricing across the industries. There will be an oversupply, and in fact, it currently already is an oversupply of goods and services across China's economy. In this scenario, there will be even less money to go around on the side of the consumers, on the side of would-be buyers, and the entire sentiment in the economy will be more pessimistic, and people will be less willing to spend whatever money that they still have at their expense, at their disposal, and overall, this makes for a market that is unlikely to support the pricing of a very expensive item, right? So eventually this means that it puts a downward pressure on the price of housing. So it is not impossible for the Chinese government to fully lock in the current pricing. They can, because China is not a full market economy. And in this, I have to say, sometimes this could be a good thing, right? And perhaps a lot of the leadership in China will believe, I don't know rightly or wrongly, but maybe they will believe that it is important to keep a rather stable pricing in the real estate market, even though this means that the market itself contracts nevertheless. Right, so basically, people want to see the price being lower. They will only support the buyers, the would-be buyers, are only willing to support the price at a lower level. But people who are holding these assets want to sell, and then this basically makes for a market when there is very little volume, and it will be very illiquid, and this actually further depresses the willingness for people to buy, because they will then believe, rightly so, that that real estate, the housing, is something that is not liquid, that if they make a purchase, it will be very difficult for them to exchange for cash later on when the need may arise. So overall, the full analysis is that it is very difficult not to at least see the market contract. So the volume will be very low, even if the government uses very strong and perhaps anti-market policies to control the price. Right, they make sure that the price does not go down. There are a lot of ways to do that. Just to think about regulations that are anti-market, there are a lot of ways that you can imagine it. But that is not going to solve the problem, and it's not going to provide the quote-unquote soft landing. It is only going to demarcate the real estate sector. Is only going to, I think, perhaps make the total supply and even more disproportionate with regards to the demand. So it's not actually going to be a soft landing after all. So in other words, it is possible to control the price, but by doing so, you have to use measures that nevertheless will not provide a soft landing. So what will happen, I think people will try, because it is a system where people believe in their abilities, and perhaps rightly so, because in such a populous country, when you are able to rise from whatever level that you start with, but nevertheless you rise to the top, it really requires a certain quality, right? It is not like, I guess this is similar to other big countries like America, indeed, even though America has just over 300 million people, but nevertheless, like India, like Brazil, these big countries, it is quite different than if you are, I don't know, the prime minister of Liechtenstein or whatever, a small country. It's possible, right? You probably, everyone, I don't know, perhaps not everyone, but a lot of people are friends or have met the prime minister of Liechtenstein. I don't know if they have a prime minister, but I'm just saying this. In that small country, you can envision this, but in a big country, it really requires a lot of luck, a lot of special qualities. I'm not going to really explain what those qualities are, because I'm not actually, I don't really know very well. I have to say that I've never met in person any of those leaders. So, but I imagine that they have something that is special, and I think among them is the belief in their own abilities. This can be a good thing, but a lot of times this are disastrous. This can have disastrous side effects. And sometimes a mismanagement on a ground scale is perhaps the result of such qualities. All right. I guess I've said enough. I hope that there are some people who have listened to this point. I'm actually still processing a lot of the photos that I've taken in the past, but I will be sharing some of the photos. In fact, all the photos that are good that I've taken during my 1 month road trip in China, I will be posting them. Perhaps not this month, but next month, because now I've finished the processing of photos from 2022. I'm doing earlier this year, photos that I've taken earlier this year, and perhaps May. I guess photos from May, they will come somewhere by the end of this month to early next month, and I will be making a few videos documenting my trip. I hope you'll be following that as well. I will be posting those photos on drjlt.com, so if you're interested, don't hesitate to check out my website. Of course, everything is free there. Thank you very much again, and have a great day.